So I'm on the way to go see Eternals. Obviously, I'm a massive MCU fan, but I know basically nothing about the Eternals. In fact, pretty much everything I know about them, I learned from the trailers themselves. So I'm going in not knowing who the characters are, their backstory, any of that stuff. Likewise, because the director's previous films are so radically different from anything in the MCU, and the early reactions are all over the place. Some people are loving it and others aren't even liking it. So I have absolutely no idea what to expect when I head into that theater. And that's pretty exciting for an MCU film. So I'm gonna head in and watch it, and then we're gonna talk about it. So I just got out of the theater from watching Eternals. On a story and storytelling level, man, I had a lot of issues with this film. Eternals is the latest film in the long-running MCU, and it tells the story of a group of 10 eternal heroes sent to protect the Earth from creatures called Deviants. Be sure to leave a comment down below in the comment section with your expectations and excitement level for the film. Also, this is a spoiler-free review, and there absolutely will be a spoiler review for this movie. There's so much more I want to talk about that I can't touch on here. This is actually a movie that's really tough to review without being able to go in the spoilers, but I'm gonna do the best that I can. So let's get started with the good. And right off the bat, this is a big, bold change of pace for the MCU. As much as I love this franchise, some of the movies do kind of follow some similar plot structures. There is kind of a sameness to the vibe of them. And when it comes to Eternals, this does something new. It doesn't follow the templates, the formulas. It tells a very different type of story, and it tells it in a different way. So if you've been wanting something new from the MCU, that's what this is. And the scope, size, scale of this film is massive. It does cover about 7,000 years of history. It is telling a story with cosmic implications. It ties all throughout human history while telling a story with massive stakes in the present. So to that point, this film probably contains the most world building of any film inside of the MCU, or I guess in the case of this, world expansion. It just fleshes out this whole other layer of what's been going on in the MCU that we weren't aware of, and explaining kind of all these origins and backstories and cosmic creatures and protectors here on the Earth. One of the neat things they've been doing with Phase 4 is they've kind of been showing us what's going on behind the scenes. Phases 1 through 3 were very much about these threats to humans on the Earth. And then in Phase 4 and with the Disney Plus shows, they're showing us all these other things kind of going on. So with Loki, it was about the protectors of time. With What If, it was about the multiverse and keeping that intact. And here, it's kind of talking about some of these cosmic celestial creatures and the nature of the universe as a whole. And so it just makes the MCU so much bigger. And then just on technical levels, this is probably the best looking MCU film with the color palette, the set designs, and some of it simply because they are showing so much of human history in so many different continents. There's just a lot of gorgeous imagery on display. Likewise, big chunks of it are shot in IMAX. So there's just these massive, gigantic shots that are gorgeous to look at. And as it is a Marvel movie, of course, there's plenty of fun to be had here. In particular, as the story starts to bring the Eternals back together, you see them in very different places and points of life, and some of them are a little bit more emotional and sad, and some of them are just a ton of fun. In particular, what they do with Kumail Nanjiani's character, I thought was hilarious. I had a whole lot of fun with both him, the nature of his character, and kind of his sidekick that's along for the ride with him. Just a fun little addition. If you're someone that's a little bit more sensitive to kind of goofy MCU humor, some of it'll probably bug you, but I still got a kick out of it, and I thought it was a nice spice for this film. But there's several of these little plot lines that play out kind of nicely, and then like even with Kit Harington's character and his kind of reaction to being sucked up into this world and being introduced to these Eternals. There's some nice little reactions and references to former boyfriends and stuff that are just nice little touches. And without wanting to say too much about this, there's multiple references to another franchise that's not owned by Disney in this film that I couldn't believe that they did one of these, and then they did several more of them, and all of them were a blast. And there are several moments in the film that do have some nice emotional punch to them. In particular, I thought that the relationship between Angelina Jolie's character and the person she's partnered with, how that friendship plays out and where that storyline leads, I thought that was the most emotional segment of the film. But there are quite a few relationships in this film that kind of have a rich history to them, and so when characters make certain choices throughout the film, it pulls out big emotions from the audience and in different ways depending on how you're specifically wired, because it is telling such a grand story. And also just with this film, it's trying to do a lot, and I respect the ambitions of this film because the story is massive. It's tackling a lot of ideas and themes that you don't normally see inside of an MCU film. It is more mature. It's aiming at a higher age range than most MCU films, especially from Phase 3, and I respect the fact that they tried something different, aimed a little bit higher. With that said, let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And the first thing that comes to mind here is the IMAX format. Now, when it does the IMAX shots, they are gorgeous, they are immersive, they are shot wonderfully, but the way they used the IMAX was they'd incorporate it in sequences, but every shot wouldn't be in IMAX. And so it'll do this big, gigantic IMAX shot that fills up the entire screen in front of you, and then the next shot is half the size in the middle of the same sequence without transition. And for me, that pulls me out of the moment, and I'm paying attention to the aspect ratio changing rather than just being immersed in this world. Second thing to note here, there is a sex scene in the film, and I note this not because as an adult do I have a strong opinion on this matter, but because I'm a parent and I allow my two older kids to see a large percentage of the MCU films. So as a parent, that's a piece of information I would like to know going into it. It's not long, it's only 10 minutes long. It's just two people stacked on top of each other and you see one of their backs. It's not a particularly big deal, but the MCU has built a brand where they haven't really done a sex scene since the beginning of the first Iron Man. And so it's just something you should know before you go into the film, especially if you're a parent deciding what is right for your children. Third thing, there are two post-credit scenes. One is right in the middle, one is afterwards. Both of them are just teasing future things for these characters. I thought they were fine. Some people will really enjoy the first one because of the person that's introduced. It's a nice little surprise, but for me, I wasn't like blown away by them or anything like that. It's not world-shattering for the MCU as a whole. With that said, let's move on to the bad. If you're familiar with my channel, you know that I love the MCU. I love most comic book movies, and in particular, I grew my YouTube channel with my MCU rankings. So I always go into these movies looking to have a good time, and I am biased to like all of them. But unfortunately, after my first viewing, I didn't really like this movie. Now, there is plenty of entertainment value. There's a lot of things I did like about the film, but the story and the storytelling were so frustrating to me that they sort of masked all the stuff that I did like. Now, with this film, it's difficult to elaborate on what didn't work about the film without going into any spoilers because there are so many twists, turns, and reveals, but I'll do the best that I can. But to put my issues concisely, I didn't feel that the script and director were able to balance all of the characters, plot lines, and themes while working within the constraints of being an MCU film. And here's what I mean by that. In order to fit into the MCU timeline and have all of the appropriately spaced out action sequences that you have to have in a Marvel movie, the movie is told in non-linear order. They also want to get to the present as quick as possible, and because the movie wants everything to be a twist, a turn, or a reveal, it means the order in which they reveal information and tells their story has big, gigantic things happening to characters before that character has really been introduced to the audience. We don't know who they are yet, but they do something to that character, so we don't know why it matters or why it's a big deal or what people will feel about that until much later on in the film. Likewise, because of the nonlinear storytelling with all the twists and the turns, creates a scenario where the characters are introduced and removed in a very strange way. Like Kit Harington's character is established thoroughly in the first 20 minutes, but he is not important to this particular story. But some of the Eternals, who are important to the plot as well as the group dynamics, aren't really introduced until over 90 minutes into the film. Like, there's one character that I thought had died in one of the flashbacks because the movie takes so long to introduce them in the present. I just assumed I'd missed something or forgotten something that happened. But no, we just hadn't gotten around to introducing that character yet. And they're very important to the plot. And one of the reasons for that is that this is a get the band back together movie.
We need to find the others.
I haven't seen some of them for centuries.
Where the Gemma Chan character is going around getting all the Eternals back together. But since we don't know any of these characters, every time she meets up with someone, it has to pause to introduce that character, give us their backstory, and explain their perspective on humanity and what the Eternals should or should not be doing. And it just makes for a very long journey to finally get all of them back together. And as I said, there's a couple of them that don't show up in the present until over 90 minutes into the movie. Another element that didn't fully work for me was its exploration of its many themes. It wants to be a film about the beauty of humanity and the human experience, but it tries to tackle so many different topics that it didn't come together for me. So part of it is about free will versus predestination, touches on man's inhumanity to man. Does the ends justify the means? Can you do something evil for the sake of something better? Even sort of the theological problem of evil. It dabbles in all of it. It touches on all of these different questions and ideas, but it's not able to go deep or explore any one of them, and it doesn't come to some specific cohesive point with all of it. And along these same lines, the morality of the conflict in the third act is just a total mess. It wants to create a scenario where each of the Eternals has a different perspective on what they should or shouldn't do and why, with each of them having a different motivation. But the movie simply doesn't have enough runtime to establish all of these characters, do all of this world building, and help us to fully understand all of the ramifications of what's taking place in the third act and what is or is not right. And so it just feels like a contrived scenario where it wants to have this morally complex situation without having any clarity. All of it feels very muddled, but not even the characters in the story know what was the best situation, and the audience doesn't understand any of it enough to draw any of our own conclusions. And so it just seemed like them trying to do something really interesting, but not quite getting there, because it's a film trying to do way too many things with too many characters, too many ideas, and too many moral dilemmas. And when there's that much going on, none of it can be fully developed all the way. This might seem like a strange comparison, but to me, this movie felt like it was trying to explore all the ideas and philosophy that was in Batman v Superman.
Why didn't you guys help fight Thanos? Or any war, all the other terrible things throughout history?
Superman could have saved your child, but on principle, we did not want him to act.
I figured out way back. If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good.
But with the put the team together plotline, mythology, and world-ending stakes of Zack Snyder's Justice League, and all of it with the tone of an MCU film. And I just think that's way too much to put in one movie that's under 3 hours long. Obviously, it worked for a lot of people. I've seen a bunch of people saying it is their favorite MCU film. But for me, it attempted to do way too much for just one film, and it crumbled under its own ambitions. Real quick before I give you my final score, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your excitement level for Eternals, as well as what are you expecting from this film. I'm very, very curious how audiences are gonna react to this film. And if you're new to my channel, I've done a ton of MCU content. Normally I'm more positive about the MCU. You can check out my rankings right up here. Looking at Twitter, it seems like this might be the most polarizing film in the entire MCU. A bunch of people are absolutely loving this film. And most of the things they're listing about the film that they enjoyed, I would say those are the positives for the film. I respect that this movie tried something different. It doesn't follow the formula. It aims for some lofty goals. It explores some big ideas. But at the end of the day, I simply do not think that the movie's story and storytelling reached the film's lofty ambitions. Overall, I can only give it a C. On the entertainment scale, it's a 5.5, and this is one that you can wait to stream it. But that's just my opinion. A ton of people are loving it, and maybe you will too. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, actually, they'll probably be more positive than this video was. Check out that playlist right over there. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry I didn't enjoy the film more, and keep talking movies too much.